Today, I'm bringing you a quick list of players that I'm adding off the waiver wire this week, as well as some players that I'm not going to be adding despite having good weeks, and some players I'm willing to cut in redraft in order to make room for those new additions. And we're going to get to all that right now. Welcome back to the Dynasty Rewind YouTube channel. My name is Bob Van. Welcome in if you are new, and if you are new, I do hope you consider subscribing. As you can see the schedule behind me, we are bringing you darn near daily fantasy football content, covering all the bases for Dynasty, redraft, whatever the case is, whatever the time of the year is, we got you covered. For those of you that are subscribed, I do hope you're enjoying the content. Thank you so much for coming along for the ride. I do hope you give this video a like. It is the easiest way to support the channel. And then just as a quick bit of housekeeping, previous weeks we've been having the offensive waiver wire and IDP waiver wire together. Now we are going to be splitting those up to give each a little more individual attention as opposed to putting them all in the same video. And then the weekly recap we had will now be moving on to the Dynasty update on the podcast, where the Big Four will be covering all the main aspects from the previous week. But with all that said, let's cut to the waiver wire. I'm just going to be straight up with you guys. There's not a lot of players I'm looking to add this week. There are situations where I'm in leagues and I'm not even going to be putting in waiver claims this week solely because of the fact of if my offense is solid and I'm not dealing with a ton of injuries yet, I'm not necessarily going to be rushing to the waiver wire to grab these guys. The first 2 weeks of waiver wires are more often than not a feeling out process of players we maybe missed on or weren't really sure we're going to have expanded roles this season. So after those two kind of laundry list weeks, it gets to be a lot shorter of a list and more about who to cut and who to maintain on your roster and filling in for injuries along the way. Speaking of injuries, that leads me to my very first pick, and I think this is going to be pretty much everyone's top waiver wire ad of the week, and that's Chuba Hubbard, the running back out of Carolina, filling in now for CMC. And there are going to be people out there that probably tell you to go buy in on Royce Freeman solely because he's a cheaper option. But the fact of the matter is he just didn't get nearly as much work as Chuba. Chuba was already getting factored into the offense while CMC was healthy. As somebody who really bought in on Royce Freeman at the beginning of his career, drafted him as a late first round pick in rookie drafts, I'm not sold on him getting much of a role in that offense. It's just he's not really scheme fit, in my opinion. So while I do think Royce will see an uptick in work solely because they have to spread the work around a little bit, speaking quickly on another running back, and that is Zach Moss, running back out of Buffalo. And if you follow me for any significant amount of time, you know that I've never been a huge Zach Moss fan. However, now is the time to really get in on this guy. He has a slew of great matchups coming up. While he's not racking up a ton of yardage, which is the big concern for me, he had a pretty good week this past week and was even pretty efficient as a runner. My biggest concern probably is that I think he's a little touchdown dependent, but again, he is facing a slew of really good matchups ahead. So he might be a guy that, heats up, gets a lot of traction now, and that you can flip later for more valuable players down the road. Another guy we definitely got to talk about is Josh Gordon being reinstated by the NFL. Just kidding. I'm not going to talk about Josh Gordon. I'm way out on Josh Gordon. I'm not going to advise anybody to go add Josh Gordon. And I hope that made you chuckle this Monday morning. Somebody I think that people really need to check their waiver wire for is Brandon Ayuk. A lot of people bailed on him after last week. Much to their chagrin, Brandon Ayuk seems to at least be back in the graces enough to have more of a full-time snap share. He still wasn't the leading target getter by any stretch, but I don't think he's going to end up being the preseason darling that everybody had coming into this year, myself included. I do think there's some middle ground to be had where we wanted him to be and where he was, last week. And if somebody dropped him and you have top waiver priority or you have a decent amount of fab you want to spend on the guy, I think it's worth it. If you're hurting at wide receiver, say you had AJ Brown and he's not around right now and he misses time, I think you can do a lot worse than Ayuk on the waiver wire. Somebody I like to look at specifically for dynasty leagues, I'm not chasing him in redraft at all, but that's Donovan Peoples-Jones. Just two spectacular catches. I think he's really earning the trust of Baker. And when we look at that offense with those wide receivers of Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, they're not getting any younger. At some point, they're going to have to kind of pass the torch to another wide receiver. And I think there's as good a chance of any that it's going to be Donovan Peoples-Jones. And like I mentioned at the beginning, that is it for my waiver wire list. I know it's a shorter list, but again, I don't want to just give you a laundry list of players that I don't necessarily believe in or players that are just widely covered by everybody. I just wanted to give you guys a short, quick list of players that I'm actually prioritizing this week in my leagues where I can. Speaking of players that I don't really believe in and why they're not on my list, starting off with Peyton Barber, had a really good week against Miami. Miami's proven that they're not really that great against the run this year, which is a surprise because I do think Brian Flores runs a pretty decent defense, and that is usually a focus of a Belichickian defense is to kind of kill the run when you can. But my biggest concern with Peyton Barber himself is just that I don't see Josh Jacobs being out that much longer. I would assume that he returns this week. It is something worth monitoring. I think there are probably a decent amount of people in the same boat as me where they assume Josh Jacobs is going to be back in the lineup sooner rather than later, so they just leave Peyton Barber on the wire. But I do think that if Josh Jacobs is set to miss another week, you could do a lot worse than Peyton Barber, especially, like I said, if you're hurting in that CMC category where you're out a top tier runner and you just need somebody to throw in your lineup so you're not devastated by a massive injury to what was your first round pick this year. He's never been an overly consistent player. He's more of he really needs the volume to be worthwhile. He's not super efficient. Another player who I like, but I'm still not adding this week is Emmanuel Sanders. Had the 90 some yards and the 2 touchdowns. And don't get me wrong, I think Emmanuel Sanders still has it. My biggest issue with Emmanuel Sanders is I just really don't trust anyone in this wide receiver group outside of Stephon Diggs. The list of players that I kind of like on this offense is Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and then it's pretty much endless, and then a small scribble of Zach Moss / Devin Singletary. However, my 2 issues with them is I just think they're kind of cannibalizing each other, and neither one's going to be really good as long as the other one's healthy. But if you need a running back, Zach Moss is a good pickup for you. Another player that I'm just not really sold on, and I'm probably going to get ripped for this one, is AJ Green. And I know he's coming off back-to-back touchdown weeks of 70-plus yard performances. However, this is 2 weeks where DeAndre Hopkins has been banged up. And it's almost scientifically proven that when DeAndre Hopkins is still on the field but playing injured, the wide receivers around him do really well. And this is why when DeAndre Hopkins was listed to play but was doubtful coming into the game, or at least questionable, I slotted in Christian Kirk to my lineup because I was pretty dang confident that he was going to have a good week as well. And he did. He just didn't get the touchdown like AJ Green did. I do think you could probably do worse than AJ Green out on the wire, but he's just not a guy I'm really ready to buy in on. Just been banged up and injured the last 2 years. Maybe he is finally healthy, and if he has another good week, I'm going to absolutely put my foot in my mouth about it and say that, absolutely go get this guy if you need a wide receiver in your league. This was also a game where Rondale Moore just kind of disappeared, so I don't foresee that happening after being so involved the first 2 weeks. However, I will say this offense is something you want every piece of that you can get. So while I'm not adding AJ Green, I don't think it's a terrible option for you. Really quick before diving into the players that I'm already willing to cut bait on this season, I wanted to bring you my Monday Night Football predictions brought to you by Underdog Fantasy in the form of giving you some of my favorite over-under picks heading into tonight's game and hopefully helping you cash out with a nice payout. As you can see, I have Dallas winning the game. However, I do think it's going to be a really close game. I can see both teams winning this one. Philly's defense low-key has been pretty solid this year, except against the run, which obviously Dallas has a great running back in Ezekiel Elliott and a good change of pace option in Tony Pollard. The first pick that I'm going to make is the Jalen Hurts 306.5 total yards over. And I'm picking that mostly because of the fact that Dallas has allowed over 300 passing yards in the first 2 games. So they obviously can't stop a whole lot through the air. Jalen Hurts has been good about adding stuff on the ground as well. So I think that's a fairly safe pick. The next pick, and this just kind of coincides with the Jalen Hurts over itself, seeing if he's going to have 306 yards, I dang well hope that at least 60 of them go to Devonta Smith, seeing that there's not really a ton of other passing options in that offense, aside from Jalen Reagor and Dallas Goedert. And the last pick I'm going to make is going to be the Zeke Elliott 79.5 rush and receiving yards. And a lot of this coincides again with the Philly defense just not being able to handle the run. And in order for Dallas to win this game, I think they're going to have to establish the run on the ground. And a great way to do that is by utilizing your first round running back draft pick that you paid a boatload of money to. I'm going to put in my $5 bid. It's not a monster slip. It's only going to be a $30 payout. You can obviously feel free to check out any of these other options. I didn't really care for the receiving props for CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper. I lean towards the under because Philly has been so efficient in stopping the pass game. But those were my Monday Night Football prediction. I do hope you enjoyed this segment. If you do want to get over to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code REWIND at checkout when you make your first deposit. You'll get a free $10 to play with. You can do that or use the link in the description box below. Ride with me or don't. It's your call, your picks. And it's just another way to enjoy a great game. Then moving on to the players I'm willing to cut to make any roster moves you need to make in redraft. First player on that list is Ronald Jones. I was a huge Ronald Jones fan coming into the season, and it just seems like he is not the guy for this offense. And while that's a shame, it is what it is. It just doesn't seem like Bruce Arians really has any interest in keeping Ronald Jones involved after getting him involved. Any mistake or miscue seems to send him right back to the bench. And if that's the case, it's just time to move on. I would say he's worth a hold in Dynasty because he is supposed to be a free agent. So you never know where he might end up, although I'm not overly optimistic, but it's still worth a hold in Dynasty. Another player worth the hold in Dynasty, but not really in redraft, in my opinion, is Laviska Shenault, another player that, my buddy Nate convinced me to be high on. That offense so far this season just seems pretty darn inept. Whether it's Trevor Lawrence just not being ready or Urban Meyer just failing to run any sort of mockery of an offense, the case stands as it will that Laviska Shenault just hasn't really popped off yet this year, and I don't really see it happening with the inefficiencies in that offense. Another player I'm willing to move on for, and I think this guy is a surprise to some as being not really a guy this year, and that's Robbie Anderson. Had a decent week one with that 53-yard touchdown reception from Darnold. It was cute and all while they were on their reunion tour. However, it's been the DJ Moore show since week one and up until and through week three. Now, I'll say Robbie Anderson on this list is probably the player I'm least willing to cut right now, but I will if I need to make room. And that's really because of the fact with DJ Moore getting banged up last week and CMC set to miss time, this does possibly open up targets down the way. However, Robbie Anderson just has not been a fixture of this offense by any stretch of the imagination. That is it for the waiver wire video today. I do hope you all enjoyed. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like. Check out the other videos on the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I will see y'all tomorrow for the IDP waiver wire video. But that is it for me today. I do hope y'all have a good one.